Mr. Brown. I think it's important that he be mentioned today, and I believe as a Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva were nifter in this segment of time between Sukkot, Pesach and Shavuos, which is a time for Avodah ben Adam Chavero. He was a person who was exemplary in his ben Adam Chavero in many, many facets. I'd like to say a few words, and him at his levaya for halachic reasons, whatever, but I would just like to mention that he was a person that the next fellow, how big or how small that person was, made a real difference in his life. In other words, there's some people that say, it's important to do chesed, so that person needs chesed, I'll do chesed. But it's not that they're really interested in that person and that person, that he actually attached himself to that person and what that person's needs were, and he had the ability to feel that person's pain, need, or desire in order to help them. And I believe that this quality of connecting him with people is what made him so invaluable in our community, and all the people as individuals, the community as a whole, he became an integral member and a beacon for people to look to. Because here was a fellow who made it to the top without hurting anybody on the way. Which is not a small statement to say about somebody who became a Baal Tshuva at a later age in his life. Okay, now the subject of today's shir is something that he would have actually enjoyed. This has to do with halachos of people on vacation and going on trips. I'm going to start off with a footnote in a sefer of Rav Shlomo Zalman's halachos by his son-in-law Rav Zalman Nechemya Goldberg. There is an entry in there into a question which is of great discussion amongst today's poskim. I don't think that I saw anybody before 50 years ago discuss this question. And I'm going to explain why I believe that is so. The question is a person allowed to go on vacation to a place where there's no minyan? Okay? Now, this is the kind of a question which I like. Why? Because in order to answer this question, you're going to have to do a lot of sourcing subjects. The first subject, which is of importance, is how much of a chiyuv is. I'm sure that everybody here has known or has been in situations that because of their job, they were forced to daven bichirus. And that's something which is commonly done, and it's considered okay to do. I guess we could take out of that, loosely defined, that for a very important reason, a person could skip tefillah b'tzibur, which is more or less correct. The problem is what's called an important reason. This is where life becomes difficult. How important is it to go on vacation? How important is it to go on a vacation in a place where there is no minyan? Now, these are the kinds of questions that have to be understood at their core in order to answer this question. And I would just like to mention that the answer to this question may not be the same for everybody. For some people it may be that's bedafka, that's what they need. They need to go to a place where they're in contact with nobody. And for other people, on their vacation, they should be rejuvenating and going to a place where there's a tzibur of people davening. So I'm not even going to get involved in the technical aspect of the question. I would like to discuss which is relevant in this discussion. Beis Halevi in Parshas Shemesh has a piece which is from a doctors to know. One of the questions when I get asked from a doctors very often is I have the opportunity to change my mishmeret with a Chiloni guy, and I can go home on Shabbos and have Shabbos with my family, and he'll be in the hospital being Mechal Shabbos. Why should I, who's a Shemer Shabbos Jew, go to the hospital and have no Shabbos? Let the fellow that has no Shabbos anyways be in the hospital. This is like a reasonable question, and the Beis Halevi says it's usher for him to switch mishmerets with that fellow. He bedafka has to go and be Mechal Shabbos. And the Beis Halevi explains this based on a medrash that says Vayeda Elokim. What was it that Hashem knew? So I'm going to start off with a different medical question. You have a doctor that has to service somebody on Shabbos for Pekuach Nefesh. Can he take payment for the services rendered? This is a great question amongst the Paiskim. That's not the subject of my discussion. But the Beis Halevi makes the following statement. If the person would be Shomer Shabbos if this Pekuach Nefesh situation didn't come up, and then he's Mechal Shabbos for Pekuach Nefesh, that's 100% okay. But if the fellow would be Mechal Shabbos anyways, and now he wants to become Potter from his Chil Shabbos because he wants to say there's also an aspect of Pekuach Nefesh here, the halacha is he has no heter and he's called a Mechal Shabbos. So therefore, many poskim say, based on this concept, that if the Fruma doctor switches place with the irreligious doctor, he's causing the irreligious doctor to be Mechal Shabbos. The irreligious doctor may be at home and may be doing nothing, but you're going to put him on call, you're actually causing him to be a Mechal Shabbos, and if you go, you're not called a Mechal Shabbos, you're Shomer Shabbos, you're doing what you're supposed to do, you're being Mechal Shabbos Pekuach Nefesh, which is 100% okay.
It's more likely he's going to be Mechal Shabbos, going places, driving, whatever he's going to be doing.
Okay,
You're
that's...
getting him in a situation where it's maybe less of a Chil Shabbos.
I would say it's more of a Chil Shabbos. Every doctor on call does countless Chil Shabboses. That's what he has to do. At home, let's say, so he's going to turn on the television and turn it off 5 hours later. So how many things did he do? How many deraisas? If you add it up, I believe that it's the other way around. The general situation is the Mechal Shabbos in the hospital is doing way more melachas than he's doing, and especially if he's a surgeon, there are melachas and they are aser. The concept that the Beis Halevi is telling us is that if a person is a oinus, so then he's potter from that which he did, only if he didn't do it because of his oinus. So in this question about am I allowed to go to such a place that I'm not going to have a minyan, how much oinus or how much were you looking to go on vacation in a place where there is no minyan? In other words, this becomes a real soul-searching question. I'll just add to this question a situation which I was asked about maybe about 15 years ago, and I'll tell you the question that I was asked and the answer that I gave. A group of Bochrim asked me, with Summer Bein Azmanim, that they want to go and rent some tzimurin up north, and they have two places. They could go to one place that the mattresses are this thick, and there's a minyan, or they could go for the same price to another place that the mattresses are this thick, and there's no minyan. So they asked me, are they allowed to go to the place that the mattresses are this thick, and there's no minyan? Is that a good enough reason? So I answered them based on what I was taught by my Rabbeim. When we will, Achamei Esim Shana, go to our Din Torah in Shemayim, who's going to be on the Bezdin? The Gedolim of our generation. So I told these Bachrim, I said, imagine after 120 years, and you're in Bezdin Shalmaila, and this is a question that's asked. Do you think that you could explain to Rebbe Elyashiv the importance of that extra 2 inches of mattress? If you do, then go for it. If you can't, then you'll just have to settle for the regular thick mattress. Okay? And I believe that that's the answer to the question. And this is true, even some people would say, should I spend the extra money for that extra mattress? And some people, it's worth it for them, and some people, it's not worth it for them. This question has to do with going on vacation all the time. Now, the statement which I would like us to walk away from this shir is that we never, I heard this from Rav Gifter myself, he used to scream to the Bochrim about the Shabbos off. He'd say, it's off of what? In other words, you have your regular, you have a Shabbos on, where you're doing Shabbos, and then you have a Shabbos off. It's off of what? He said you're a Ben Torah 24/7, 365. There's no such thing as a Shabbos off. You could have a different kind of Shabbos. You're supposed to be doing different things. You know, as they say in the other yeshivas, what's Bein Hazmanim for? It's to learn those parakim in the Masechta that you don't learn during the Zman. It's not to do other things. You have to know what is it that you're trying to do. How is this going to add to the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? And I'm not saying that one shouldn't go on vacation and have a good time. As the expression goes, all work and no play makes John a dull boy. It's important for people to rejuvenate themselves and to have a good time sometimes, because it produces success in their endeavors that they're doing when they're on. But what subject I'd like to discuss is some of the questions which come up when people are on vacation, and that they should be aware that there's a way to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this ad hoc situation called vacation. Okay, the is a story of the Tribuna Rav when he went to take his proba for his first shteller. The first time he went to take a job as a Rav, so the custom in Europe was you would go there for a Shabbos and you would give a drasha or whatever, if you are a candidate that they want or not. So the first time he went on such an interview, he went to his Rebbe, and before he left, his Rebbe gave him a luach. A luach. And he said, what should I do with the luach? He said, take it with you. So he took it with him. And on the train, on the way to where he was going, he decided to open the luach, and he flipped through the luach. And when he came to his meeting with the board, the first question that the people on the board asked him, when is the next Moiled, and what day is Rosh Chodesh next month? Now it happened to be that he was flipping through the luach, and he happened to know the answer to the question on the spot. And he answered the question, and he passed all the other parts of his examination, and he got his first shteller. When he went back to his Rav, he asked the Rav, what kind of a ness was that? What happened? You told me to take a luach, I happened to open the luach, and this kind of a question that I would never know. If you ask me when right now is Rosh Chodesh Sivan, I will tell you next month. That's about all I know. But to know what their Rosh Chodesh is going to be and when the Moed is going to be, how did you know that they're going to ask that question? Why did you just tell me that I should know the answer to that question? So his Rebbe smiled at him and said, you have to do something, right? In other words, I gave you the tools that are necessary, but you have to do something. So he knew that his Talmud is going to flip through the luach and find the answer to the question. Now this is brought down in halacha. A person who goes away and he's not sure for how long he's going, he should take with him a luach. Nowadays, I don't know if this is necessary. Most people who go away are somehow connected via the internet, or if they are not connected, they have ways via the internet to know all the pertinent information that they need to know wherever they're going. But what it says in the Chai Adam, and this is something which is practiced, when I was a kid it was practiced, somebody goes away on a trip should take with him an extra pair of tzitzis. Because it's very common that your tzitzis may rip, especially when you're on a trip. You should take with you your tzitzis, and the poskim say if you're going away overnight, you should take with you your tefillin, These are things which are brought down, and there are people nowadays, even if they go on a day trip, that they will take them with them. Overnight, you don't have to take an extra pair of these items with you. But you have to be understanding, just like your car has a spare, with you all the time, because you're never off call. You're always going to be on call. All right. I would just like to share with you an experience that I had with one of my children. I, for many years, used to take my boys in the summertime on, we would call it a tiyul retzach. We'd go on some tiyul, someplace 5 hours, that you would see nothing that moved besides maybe a scorpion. That's like there's nothing out there. What's called really in the wilderness. It's you against the natural forces. And we would do this. We did this for a few years. And I recall one time we were climbing over some very steep cliff, and my son, who scrambled up to the top beforehand, he let out a scream. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what a beautiful world. And we all climbed on top, and we had a fantastic view of the Yam HaMelech and the whole southern region of Eretz Yisrael. And I said to myself, this is what vacation is for. It's supposed to bring you to, and this is what the Rambam says, that by seeing the Teva, seeing HaKadosh Baruch Hu's handiwork, it's supposed to bring you to a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So if a person can go on a trip and what comes out of his mouth is Shvach Ma'idol HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he's able to see that, that's called a successful trip. Okay, I won't discuss how we got down from there, but at least the going up was an important idea. And there is what to be said about seeing nature, the other kinds of excursion things that people do. But at the end of the day, we looked that it should solidify our interest and connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay. One of the other things that, since we live in a generation of schoolists, I would just like to mention there are two schoolists which are brought down in the swarm of schoolists for people who go on trips. I'm going to mention them not because I embrace any of them, but there may be somebody over here who would like to embrace them. For the two schoolists that I found the most commonly the people have to take with them, they're Dalit Minim when they go on a trip, even the old, rumpled up Lulav and Esrig, and there are those who at least take with them a leaf from their Arava. There are those, and I've seen this done, there are people who after Sukkot, they take a leaf from their Arava, and they, what's it called? They plasticize it. They laminate it, that's the word, yeah. They laminate it and they put it in their wallet, and it has a segula aspect to it, and they go on a trip to take with them. There are others who have a minig that take a piece of matzah, of shmura matzah with them, and it has a shmira. I know of this segula when I was a young boy in the 1970s. Some Iranian Jews moved into our community, and on the first day of Pesach, the father brought his matzah, a piece left over from the afikoimin, and he touched it to the Sefer Torah, and he took it home with him. He said, "This is what they use as a segula for the whole year." Okay, I don't know. I'm not from Iran. I don't know exactly all the minhagim, but obviously there's such a minig, and this is something which is brought down in halacha. Now, a person who's on a trip, there are all kinds of halachas in regard to washing for bread. How much does a person have to wait if there's going to be a place where he could wash beforehand, or how far does he have to go backwards? And a person should be aware that you're not patur from washing just because you're on a trip. Okay? Generally speaking, if it's within an hour and 12 minutes in front of you, you have to wait to eat. And if it's 20 minutes behind you, then you can wash and cover your hands with plastic bags or something like that and eat your bread without washing. All right. I would like to mention a halacha which is not practiced nowadays. Many times people discuss, you say a goimel when you go overseas, you go on a plane, you go, well, when do you do say a goimo, when you don't say a goimo? One of the things that it says is a person is holich midborius, you're supposed to say a goimo. That means anybody who travels from Yerushalayim to the Yam HaMelech should have to say a goimo. I have not yet seen anybody who has ever done that. Okay? And the question is why? So I'm going to answer this question in two parts. First, I'm going to give you my personal, not halachic opinion, but halachic understanding opinion of halacha of Tfilas HaDerech, and then we're going to apply that to HaGoyma. The halacha is, let's say, I get into my car in Yerushalayim and I drive to Haifa. I think all opinions would say that I bench Tfilas HaDerech. I think everybody would say that. I'm willing to say that there's no time on that trip. That trip is, let's say you go on Kvish Achad, Kvish Shesh, and then you're already in Haifa. There is no time on that trip that you aren't together with hundreds of people. You're never in a piece of time that you are alone. There are more people with you in that piece of traveling than there were in the shtetl in Europe. So how could you say that a person is out of the yishuv if there's no difference between driving on those highways or driving on a city highway in New York, right? The Gowanis and Kvish Achad are more or less the same amount of traffic, same amount of traffic jams. So why would you have to say Tfilas HaDerech if a person is going on what we call superhighways today? And I will just say it's not so simple that according to all poskim one must. According to many, there's only because of if you put a few different reasons together that one is obligated to say Tfilas HaDerech. Now, Chacham Ben Zion Abashol and others say that deserts that are commonly traveled, it's no big deal. If it's no big deal, then halachically it becomes no big deal, because you're just on a regular highway. There's nothing exciting, extraordinary happening, and therefore you're not obligated to say Tfilas HaDerech. You're not allowed to bench a goymo when you go to these places. And similar, this idea is also similar. The custom of most people is that when they go to the zoo, they do not make a bracha of Meshan HaBrius when they see the monkeys and the elephants. And I think the reason for that is also brought by many poskim, because those are normal occurrences in our urban society today to see monkeys and elephants, right? It's only in the days of yesteryears of cows and geese that seeing a monkey was uncommon. But nowadays, since we see them all the time, they don't elicit in us an extra emotion, and being that extra emotion isn't elicited, so then the need for a bracha, according to many poskim, is not there.
What if you see the monkey and Mamish disappears and acts like a person?
So always meant at least a short stop in Niagara Falls. Okay? And I was of the opinion at that time, I still am, that somebody who sees Niagara Falls has to make a bracha. Okay? Now, the Bachrim that I was with, I never heard anybody say they have to make a bracha Niagara Falls. Okay? So one trip that I mentioned this, we were actually leaving from Borough Park. I said, we're going to go to Niagara Falls and I'm going to make a bracha. And everybody booed me down. There's no bracha made when we go to Niagara Falls. We went to daven in the shtibel on Shemesh, and it happened to be the Rav Laguna of Toronto was there, and he's a fellow that I know him because he used to live in Detroit. And I approached him and I asked him, "Do you make a bracha when you see Niagara Falls?" He said, "Of course." So that was basically the end of the conversation. Yeah. Okay. So I know him from time I'm 7. Okay. So, these are halachos. If you see the Grand Canyon, you should make a bracha. Okay. These are things. You see the redwood forest. Talking about the wonders of nature, which are spectacular. I will just say as follows. I'm not sure, I don't know the answer to this question, and this has happened to me, when you fly to America from Eretz Yisrael, depending where you make your pit stop along the way, many times you see the Alps from the windows. Now, sometimes you get a really good picture of the grandeur of the Alps, and sometimes you don't. So, if you have to make a bracha or not, in my opinion, depends on how great a picture you actually have. And I would just like to mention one other question has to do with the plane and making brachas. And this has something which happened to me once. I once, one year, went, for some reason I had to go to Tel Aviv or to Rishon LeZion or something, and I passed by the Yom HaTichon, and I made a bracha on the Yom HaTichon. And then the next week, I got a phone call from America. They had to go to America for a few days, and I flew to America. Now there's a question, there are two brachas that are to be made. On one Yom, you say Oisa Ma'aser Bereishis, and on the other Yom, you say Oisa Yom HaGodol. So the person who is in the plane going over Spain and Portugal, that he can actually see the Yom HaTichon and the Yom HaGodol, makes the bracha al Yom HaGodol, and then it's a Ma'aser Bereishis, one after the other. But on the Yom HaTichon itself, there's a machlokes haposkim if that's called the Yom HaGodol. That's what the bracha gets al Yom HaGodol, or the bracha Oisa Ma'aser Bereishis. And being that I made Oisa Ma'aser Bereishis beforehand, just a week before, I told somebody on the plane that when you're going to make the bracha of Yom HaGodol, you should have me in mind. So the guy looks at me like I'm from Mars, and he says, "What are you making a bracha on?" So I said, "This is halacha in Shulchan Aruch that you have to make a bracha." These are halachas which people who are not familiar with Shulchan Aruch aren't aware of, and they're very simple, straightforward halachas that people should be aware of. Okay.
Traveling from Beit Shemesh to Jerusalem on bicycles over the hills, my sons have done it a few times.
Yeah, my kids do it every Friday, yeah?
So would they have to say Agoma on that because it's on deserted dirt tracks going over?
No, that's not desert. That is forest. Okay? I would say that they should say Tzilas HaDerech. That's what I would say that they should say. And it's not a simple ride. Okay. I would like to just now mention some halachas that have to do with people in travel and eating. First of all, if somebody goes to Europe and you go to a hotel, and in the hotel they have a kumkum chashmali, in my opinion, you're allowed to use that to make yourself coffee or tea or whatever. You're in America, you can do that. If you go to the Far East, you are not allowed to use it. And the reason for this is because in the Far East, the inhabitants of those countries will cook their clams, oysters, lobsters in there. They just drop them in and they make them, and that's a treifa pot. And that's commonly done there. It's not commonly done in Arkansas. Okay, so depending on where you are, can you assume that it's kosher to be used? The answer is that it's okay. That is as far as if you're going on a trip to Europe, the Far East, or America. If I'm going to go to some place in Eretz Yisrael, then the question is a totally different question. Because then you have a question, did somebody toivel that urn? And the halacha is that you're not allowed to use a non-toiveled item. Now, I'd just like to mention there is a...
It's owned by a Jew.
It's owned by a Jew. That's the in Eretz Yisrael. Right? Okay. Now, there is for some reason, a unclear minig balabatim, which the only Chubas that ever saw that spoke about it say that this minig has absolutely no source. Okay? that if you just one time you could use it without toiveling. There is no such thing. Now, and the biggest proof that there's no such thing is a halacha in Hilchos Shabbos. The halacha in Hilchos Shabbos discusses if a person finds himself on Shabbos and he needs to use a kli and it wasn't toiveled, what does he do? And the halacha says what he does is he lends it to a goy, he gives it to a goy, and then on Motzei Shabbos, when he takes it back, then he can toivel it. Now, that halacha, it says that you can only do that once, but the heter is not doing it once. The heter is that it belongs to a goy at that time when you're doing it. Okay? Now, that is an idea which is very important, and I'd like to share with you a tshuva from Shlomo Zalman, which I believe one could be saimach on in, well, I'll just use the words dire straits. You know, you found yourself in the middle of Arkansas where there is no water, right? And you have to buy yourself something, a pot to cook with, and there is no mikveh around. So what Rav Shlomo Zalman says to do is, when you pay for the pot, you have in mind not to be kind of the pot. So you're not kind of the pot. It's not yours. It's not yours. Either it's Hefker's, and one may use a pot from Hefker without touching it, or it belongs to the guy.
Why can't you be mafker?
So it's not so clear that what the halacha is. This is what he says. You pay for it, but have in mind not to be kind of it, and then you can use it for one of the two reasons, and you could use it until you get to society, and then you're kind it, and then you toivel it. But the idea that it has to be toivel at some point, that doesn't go away, and these are just ways to take care of the problem. Okay, the next thing which I would like to discuss, this is a question in Eretz Yisrael, and this is a question that the Machmirim are very Machmiran, and the Mekilim are very Mekel on. And I would like to set before you the subject. I go to rent a zimmer up north. The place that I rented it from is at best from some traditional Sephardi guy. Okay? What do you think the level of kashrus of the mezuzah on that zimmer is? Okay, I'm willing to say that it's below acceptable. Okay? I didn't say anything more than that, but I'm willing to say it's below acceptable. So the question is, when I go to a zimmer up north, do I have to bring a mezuzah to put a mezuzah there or not? The Chazon Ish and many, whenever they would go on vacation, they would bring their own mezuzah and they would put it onto the door and they would leave it there. They didn't even take it. They didn't.
Next question.
Okay, we already took care of that. And they would leave it there because you're not supposed to take down a mezuzah if a Jew is going to be living there afterwards. If you could assume that the mezuzah was kosher, just not up to par, so then many places can say that you can take it when you leave and replace it with the mezuzah that was there beforehand. Now, there are others who say, and this is a fascinating idea, let's say, I'm going to just tell you a question that I was asked once, and I used to learn at Beis Medrash that there was a kollel of Russians there. And I used to answer questions for these Russian people, and because of that, I got a little bit of an understanding of their mentality, and they have as much to do with us as the geese in Vancouver. You understand? It's a different bria altogether. This fellow comes over to me and says, I want to ask you a question. I'm going back to Russia to visit my mother. My mother is married to a goy. And I'm going to be going back to my bedroom in my house. Do I have to put a mezuzah on my bedroom in my house? So this doesn't make sense from where I come from. You know, you live in your house, you don't live in your bedroom. And if you have to put a mezuzah, you have to put a mezuzah everywhere. And if you don't put a mezuzah anywhere, then you know what's going on. So I asked him the question which differentiates from Western society to Russian society. I said, in your 2 years that you're here in Eretz Yisrael, do you think anybody stepped into your bedroom? I said, absolutely not. It's my bedroom, I have the key. Okay? This is not the situation in Western society. A person may have a room in his house, but it's his parents' house, and when he leaves, he may come back and find some of his stuff in the basement, right? You know that's the way that the people live. It's the parents' house, and they allow their children to use space in their house for free, right? But it's not the kids' room. Here in that society, it's the kids' room. And his question was only on his bedroom, because that's his, and the rest of the house, that's not his. He has no obligation. That was his appreciation of the situation. And if that's the situation, it could very well be that his question is a good question. Now, the question is, when I go and I stay in a Holiday Inn overnight, I go to a hotel, I stay in a Holiday Inn overnight. Did I move into the Holiday Inn? What did I do?
You're renting. You're
A guest.
You're a guest, but you're a paying guest.
It's called a renter, right? That's how you mean? Okay. Well, it's even less than that. According to many poskim, only a home that people live in is obligated in mezuzah. A station that people have for a day or two, that's not called living there. You don't live there. That's called like a temporary address. And that's not mechuyev in mezuzah b'chlal.
So why they bring to the tzimmer?
What?
So why the Chazon Ish brings?
That's his opinion. This is a machlokes. This is a machlokes. In other words, how do I look at a person who rents a house? In other words, the people come to Ramat Beit Shemesh and they rent a yichida l'Shabbat. What they really are doing is they are living there for Shabbos, or they are like in transit for Shabbos. So this is a question: how do we recognize that kind of existence? But the existence of people that are in Tzimmerin, that existence is what we call a holiday existence. That's not for real. You're not really living there. And because of that, there are those places that say that even if you're there for a very short amount of time, it's not mechuyev in a mezuzah.
Short or long?
If you're there for a short amount of time, a person decides to stay in the tzimmer for a month, then it becomes his dwelling. Now,
So therefore, the mezuzah that's there that has less than
it's as good as having no mezuzah, and it's also fine. If it would have no mezuzah, it would also be okay.
Better to have no mezuzah than a mezuzah that's...
Well, that's always a question. And now there's other opinions that say the following. I have a hotel. What do I do with my rooms? I rent them out. Whose chiyuv mezuzah is it? According to some, it's on the person who owns the hotel. The renter is, as somebody said over here, a guest. Okay? If I go to somebody's house for Shabbos, the chiyuv mezuzah on my bedroom is not my chiyuv mezuzah. It's his house, and I'm just staying there. So there are those that say that the chiyuv mezuzah is not something that you have to go crazy about when you go on a trip. Okay.
Those who brought mezuzahs brought for all the rooms in the tzimmer.
What?
They brought mezuzah.
Those who
for
did that,
every
yes.
Sometimes 5 or 10.
Yeah. Okay. I would like to mention a question which is related to trips, and this is a very important question. There is a question about two things. One, the minig olam is to be mekel on, and the second one, people are much more machmir on. Taking pictures of humans is a very big question in the poskim, whether you're allowed to take a picture of a person, of his whole face, And the minig olam is that we're make on that. If you want to know, you can take a look at the newsletter. You can see there's a picture of me on there, okay? So if you want to know my opinion, that it's permissible to be done. I'll just mention on this subject a fascinating line from one of the earlier Rebbes of Belz. He was very particular not to have his picture taken, and when he had to have a passport made, the Chassidim went to a totally different district, which he didn't have to have a picture passport made to have his passport done. And when the Chassidim came back and they showed him their handiwork, so he said, "What do you think, that it's really usher to take a picture? You think that I want to be in Gan Eden, all my Chassidim should be in Gehenna? No, they're all going to be in Gan Eden together with me." In other words, that if you have your picture taken, you're not going to go to Gehenna for doing so. But what is of great discussion amongst the Paiskim is taking pictures of sunsets, of the sun, and of the moon. That is a much more severe question, and I'll just share with you that there are those Paiskim that were Mekel in the olden times, and nowadays, according to their reasons, one would have to be Machmer. In the olden times, a person took a picture and it was imprinted on film, and then it had to be developed. So there was never a picture made. It was done in different stages, and that was a reason, according to some, that there was no Isser involved. But today, that it goes digitally, it's already embedded into the brains of the camera or wherever it is embedded. There are those that are more machmer. All right, we'll stop over here, and we should all be zeicha to have all of our vacations and trips bring us closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Rav said 50 years ago this question wasn't asked about going to places that had been in.
Right.
Were you going to say a reason?
Yeah, I think the reason is because people did what they had to do. Nowadays, people do.
They want to.
Right. It's a different. Okay.